Hello, I'm Kate Gerbeau. Welcome to Sitrep, your weekly look at the big issues in defence and world affairs. Missile attacks against ships in the Red Sea are still happening on average around once every 2 days. We go inside the Royal Navy-run Emergency Control Centre, taking distress calls from vessels being targeted.
The tempo has gone up about 200 miles an hour. You could have 1, 2, or maybe even 3 issues at a time.
Also on Sitrep, as the Defence Secretary's plane has its GPS navigation system jammed by Russia, we explain the threats from electronic warfare.
It is able to bring down drones, the techniques, and also allowed Russia to identify where that drone operator is. It affected the long-range missiles.
And could quieter, more stealthy electric vehicles soon rule the battlefield? We hear how the Army is testing out technology developed in Formula One.
The main ways that we can actually collaborate with McLaren, we need to make sure that we can start bringing in their concepts on how they win a race to how we can win a fight.
Sitrep with Kate Gerbeau and Professor Michael Clarke.
It passed by almost unnoticed in the last few days that HMS Diamond has returned to the Red Sea. HMS Richmond handed back the mission protecting shipping from Houthi missile attacks launched from Yemen. Mike, it's largely dropped out of their headlines, hasn't it? But this crisis in the Red Sea is still very active.
Yes, it is. It goes on, as you said, every couple of days there is an attack. And the MOD provided, one of those lovely photo opportunities last week of the Richmond coming out while the Diamond went in, and they passed close to each other, and, there was a helicopter up to take a photograph of one coming, one going. And it looks pretty good. And the Richmond uses a Sea Scepter missile, Sea Vipers on the Diamond, but the Sea Scepter missile, the first use of Sea Scepters successfully against attacks. So all of that's good. And the Richmond's back in Portsmouth now, I think. But we shouldn't be blind to the fact that this is the Navy working really hard. There was the Diamond having to go back into the zone because we've only got 3 of our daring class Type 45s at sea at the moment. The other 3 are in refit. And the Richmond's a very hard-working Type 23 frigate. And so, in a sense, we're one ship deep all the time. We've got one ship available to do these jobs. And there is a brittleness below that, which the Navy understands very well. The Navy is very busy at the moment, and we shouldn't really forget that. Or pay tribute to the crews who are working themselves really hard to maintain this level of vigilance and operations.
Absolutely. Well, when ships in the Middle East face threats or any kind of emergency, there is a control centre they can contact for help in Portsmouth. The Royal Navy plays a big part in the work of the UKMTO, United Kingdom Maritime Operations Centre, and Sitrep's Tim Cooper has had the rare chance to see it at work. Tim, what's it like?
Hi, Kate. Well, it's interesting. It's very, very interesting. And rare chance is right. First time journalists have been allowed in, as far as I understand it. It's up at Portsdown Hill, which is the big hill overlooking Portsmouth, the Portsdown Technology Centre. It's got lots of wacky-shaped buildings in there. I thought it might be in one of those, but no. We went into a very nondescript-looking building, down some very bland corridors, and turned into what looked like a normal office, quite frankly. 3 or 4 people at workstations. It was only when you looked left and you saw basically a sort of wall-sized video display wall with very detailed maps of the Red Sea area and lots of dots on those maps, the dots being the ships, that you realised what they do in this place. And they man it 24 hours a day with watchkeepers on the phone, ready to deal with emergencies as they come in.
And Tim, a startling figure from your visit, the workload has gone up by 475% since the Houthi attacks from Yemen started in the autumn.
Yeah, the Houthi attacks have really changed everything here. From the 18th of November, when the first one happened, it's gone up exponentially and unexpectedly. They weren't expecting this, they admit. So they've really ramped up the workload there. I'm just looking on their website now, and there's been another incident today. An approach of a vehicle, a small craft approached a vehicle off the coast of Yemen, approximately a cable away from the vehicle, and it exchanged small arms fire. So all the time this is happening. The Navy contingent there is led by Lieutenant Commander Joanna Black, and she spoke to me about the effect and impact this is having on the team.
That's been very challenging for the small team here. It's not just a number of incidents, it's also the complexity of incidents now. We're dealing with multiple concurrent events involving missiles, UAV attacks, UAV harassment, small boat harassment, and also unwanted calls by entities claiming to be international authorities, telling ships to do things and then threatening them with some pretty significant action if they don't comply. And that's all incredibly challenging for civilians at sea and also for a small team to support them during some really difficult and scary situations.
Lieutenant Commander Joanna Black there from the Royal Navy. She's been working up at the centre, the UKMTO, since 2020.
Mike, we were looking at the latest numbers this week. More than 60 attacks in the space of 4 months. That's one attack every 2 days, basically. Just one of them has been fatal, though. That seems pretty remarkable.
Yes, it's also lucky. The fact is, most of these attacks fail. Most of the missiles or the drones drop short. If they're within the area of the Red Sea itself, they tend to be brought down. I mean, what's more, in a way, worrying is that these attacks have gone into the Gulf of Aden, so that the range that the Houthis are now going for is higher because they're trying to affect shipping anywhere in the area, not just opposite them in the Red Sea where the warships tend to be. But it is a containment operation. And as long as it is dangerous for shipping, then it creates the political effect that the Houthis want. However many hits they really get and however many fatalities they create, they only have to create danger to affect the insurance that ships are or are not able to take in trying the Red Sea route.
So, Tim, how does it actually work at the UKMTO? How do ships get in touch and what happens when they do?
Well, it's quite simple, Kate, and surprising. I thought there'd be lots of processes and rigmarole and going through other countries to get in touch. No, it is simply a phone number, a Portsmouth number, 02392, and all the ships around the world know about this centre. It is a worldwide resource, and if the master of the ship is concerned, they dial this number and they get straight through to the watchkeeper in Portsmouth. And that's when decisions are made and action taken. So say the ship is coming under attack, they can do a number of things. Get in touch with the relevant authorities in the locale, arrange for them to get involved in this, and importantly, let other shipping in the area know what's going on. Now, you may think in the UK, if we use that as an example, we got the Coast Guard. So if there's an issue with your ship in the UK territorial waters, you phone up the Coast Guard. But many of the areas we're talking about, many of the countries surrounding the Red Sea area, don't have that sort of infrastructure. Some do, some don't. So that's why this UK resource is so useful for the world's shipping.
And Tim, can you tell us a bit more about the team there and how they're managing this huge surge in emergency calls from the Red Sea?
It's a really, really interesting mix of people there, Kate. They have a Royal Navy contingent, but it isn't a Royal Navy-led thing. It is organised and run by the Royal Navy, but sits outside of it. So, to give you an example, if a Russian ship got in touch because they were in danger, this office and organisation would talk to them, would help them out. It's completely separate to everything else that's going on in the world at the moment. So you've got normal civilians in there who have just come there and got a job there. I spoke to one lady who'd been there a few months, and she said she got an awful sense of pride from helping people so far away. Also, some Royal Navy veterans are there as well. Darren Longhurst was in the Royal Navy, and he's one of the watchkeepers there now. And he spoke to me about how things have really ramped up.
The tempo has gone up about 200 miles an hour. There could be some days where it's really quiet, but then other days you could have one big incident that could take all day to deal with, or you could have one incident and then on top of that another incident, so you're kind of in between two or maybe even three issues at a time. It's unbelievable how much it's increased compared to when I first started here.
Mike, the US, UK and other allies have been carrying out strikes against Houthi military sites in Yemen. It doesn't really look like it's dented their capability then to carry out these strikes on shipping.
Well, I think it's reduced the capability. And I mean, the United States has carried out a number of strikes from the Eisenhower Battle Group, which is in the Red Sea itself. And Britain has carried out 4 strikes along with the US on those big nights, as it were, where it's been a joint effort operating from Cyprus. And they've been quite careful because, as I said, it's a containment operation, really. They're not going to stop it altogether. The problem they have is finding targets. I mean, it is a whack-a-mole strategy. If they could find better targets, they'd go for them. But these targets pop up quite quickly, and let off a few missiles. And if the Americans in particular can get a missile onto that, or an aircraft firing a missile onto that, they will. But it is like whacking a mole, and the mole comes up again. But the strikes haven't been great, except for a couple of weeks ago, the Saturday before Ramadan, the Houthis tried to sucker the British and Americans into what would have been a foolish move. They launched 35 drones and missiles all in one night, and 28 of them were shot down. And clearly they were trying to provoke the British and Americans to launch a retaliatory set of strikes over Ramadan. Well, they didn't fall for it, and so they just let it pass. But this is part of the cat and mouse game that's going on all the time, because the British and the Americans, they know they're not going to eliminate this, but they're suppressing it to an extent where shipping in the Red Sea is a lot safer than it would otherwise be, but not safe enough to open the Red Sea in the way that it was opened before last November.
So, Mike, how long is this going to go on for?
Until the Iranians take a different view. That's what it's all about. The Houthis can keep doing this, and they will keep doing this, because they're getting all the credit across the Arab world for standing up to the United States and standing up to Israel and supporting the Palestinians in Gaza. They don't deserve it, but they're getting a lot of credit for it. And they'll keep doing it until the Iranians stop them. And the Iranians are intrinsic to this operation. I mean, they have a ship, the Bashad, which is in the area, and the Bashad provides a lot of electronic material and surveillance to the targeting of some of these ships in the Gulf of Aden. Now, what the Allies have tended to do, they've harried the Bashad to get out of the area. They pressure it to get out. And when the Bashad is out of the area, then the Houthis find it more difficult to set up these attacks. The Iranians also have a sort of mothership, which is providing ammunition to some of the coastal defences that the Houthis run, and that too is in the area. At some point, I wouldn't be surprised if the Allies don't go for the Bashad and these motherships a bit more vigorously, even arrest them, even just sort of grab them on the basis of international law and take them into another port somewhere else. That would be escalatory, of course. It'd be even more escalatory to sink them. But this will go on until the Iranians decide that they've had enough, or that the cost of doing it is too high. But for now, the cost of doing this for Tehran is very low, so they'll keep on doing it.
So, Tim, the UKMTO is a long-standing British effort to give emergency support to ships in the Middle East. It's not just there because of the crisis, though. And as you said, it's also not just there for British ships.
Yes, that's right. It started back in about 2001 with an office based in Dubai, and I think it's been in Portsmouth since about 2014. It is totally for everybody. Now, that's Britain being very altruistic, perhaps, but also don't forget, we want these shipping lanes and need these shipping lanes to be kept safe and open. So there's a very important UK PLC element to this. But parking that, this organisation is incredibly well respected across the maritime community. And as I mentioned, it is for everybody. So you could be an Iranian ship, you could still phone up. You could be a Russian ship, you could phone up and help would come. I think they have something along the lines of a 97% reporting record. So that's 97% of the ships that qualify. We're not talking about fishing vessels and things, but the big merchant ships going through the area, reporting incidents and reporting details of their transit. So that shows, doesn't it, I think, how the maritime community trust this organisation. And it is a wonderful thing to see, tucked away, out of sight, out of mind, but a dedicated 24/7 operation keeping the world shipping safe from a tiny little office in Portsmouth.
Really interesting. Tim, thank you very much for that.
News, discussions and analysis. This is Sitrep.
Well, things haven't entirely gone to plan recently for the Defence Secretary Grant Shapps on his travels. First, he had to abandon a visit to Odessa while in Ukraine because of an intelligence warning that the Kremlin knew about the plan. Then, the plane carrying the Defence Secretary, the Chief of the Defence Staff and accompanying journalists home from Poland had its GPS location systems jammed. The RAF Envoy jet, which is used to carry high-priority personnel, ministers and royals, was flying close to the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad when it suffered the half-hour outage of the satellite navigation system. Mobile phones were also affected. Mike, this was electronic warfare at work, wasn't it?
Yes. The Russians do it. They've been doing it for a long time. Anything that goes anywhere near Kaliningrad, whether or not it flies over it, and the Envoy 4 I don't think was flying over Kaliningrad, but anything within that area, they turn their jammers on and off, and it affects civilian air traffic as much as any military air traffic. And it shouldn't have affected the Envoy 4. It did, because the Envoy 4, we have two Envoy 4 aircraft. It's based on the Dassault 900, and they replaced we used to have four HS-146s. To do this job of VIP travel. And the HS-146s were all fitted with the ECM suite, the electronic countermeasure suite. But the two Envoys don't have the electric countermeasure suite to save money. So there you are. They were flying without the normal ECM suites that the A400Ms would have, and all of our transport aircraft, they have them because they're military aircraft. But in this case, the Envoy 4s were not fitted with them as a money-saving device, and so there you are. It was to that degree vulnerable.
So if electronic warfare like this can affect the RAF's VIP planes, what else can it do? Dr. Melanie Garson is Associate Professor of International Security at University College London.
It's a really interesting incident. It's on one hand an avoidable incident. On the other hand, it's also quite a clear indication of Russia trying to play deliberately, sort of almost push on the boundaries of demonstrating its electronic warfare capability and really trying to just puff its chest and show some power in this regard.
And how much of a threat does GPS jamming present to our military capabilities? What can't we do if GPS is blocked?
It's quite significant, and the way that Russia has been using it within the context of Ukraine is it's quite significant in being able to bring down the large number of drones that Ukraine is using. So that although they're mass producing some of these smaller drones, they're losing about 2,000 a week to these kind of jamming activities, and those so they're losing control of them. And also at the same time, not only do they lose control of them, but the techniques can also allow the Russians to identify where that drone operator, where that pilot is. So it's sort of giving out a certain amount of intelligence. It affects the long-range missiles, but increasingly it affects, and this is where you begin to get that impact on civilian life as well. It will impact anything that's using GPS as part of its systems, and that can be, as we increasingly add in AI-enabled capabilities or GPS capabilities into anything, whether it's from cars to agricultural machinery that's relying on this kind of technology, it will have a big crossover effect. So it's sometimes we have to look at the ripple effects of what that does as well.
And how does it work exactly?
Well, that's a really good question. So it works in several ways. So this can be the use of radio waves, the use of microwaves, the use of infrared, visible light, UV light, to different types of rays that are going to interfere with that actual sort of spectrum, whether that's used for electronic support to sort of gain intelligence, whether it's used for threat oppression, or whether it's actually used for active interference and attacks.
And are there technical solutions that could prevent or mitigate GPS jamming?
Well, there are protections that can be done. I mean, it depends on what kind of capability you want to do this at. So for some of these smaller, like micro drones, it's not being used very well, in the sense that hardening them, there is a possibility of using AI-enabled capability that allows them to fly without live links. That doesn't work so well on the smaller capacity, but there are protections. And this is why, going back to the case of Grant Shapps last week, it is possible. It just wasn't in this particular case.
So what other forms of electronic warfare pose a risk to our military capability?
We're seeing it across the spectrum. Any time that we're building these GPS, is positioning capabilities where we're looking at targeting defense from both defensive and offensive weaponry, will leave our military susceptible. But as I say, it's throughout the wider chain of where we're using this positioning, in everything from supply chains and procurement and across the whole spectrum. So it's a fragile mechanism. And it will be increasingly important to protect about this kind of warfare as we create more integrated platforms across the board. And Russia particularly has previously had an edge on this, and they have, necessity, the mother of invention. Over the last 2 years during the war have actually actively solidified their capabilities in this regard. They've had the chance to use it more concretely, and there's real concern that particularly NATO currently doesn't match that capability.
So how do our electronic warfare capabilities stack up against potential enemies, both our ability to defend but also attack with EW?
I think, it's difficult as a civilian to 100% know that capability. We do have strong capacity and strong investment and in the area. There is, particularly and this is one of the tensions that exists in respect to the support we can give to Ukraine right now, is there's a tension in sharing that capability, partly because much of that capability is subject to export controls. There's real concern that if we were to use that capability to help Ukraine in this particular theatre, that the techniques that we would use for either spoofing or jamming in return or countering that kind of activity would be passed to China in particular, because as you use that capability, the knowledge of that capability is also gained. So there's a few tensions in how this is then used and rolled out in the current climate.
Really good to talk to you. Dr. Melanie Garson, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mike, in the case of Grant Shapps' plane, the MOD says there was never any risk and that alternative navigation methods were used. But in an era where even our phones offer pinpoint GPS location, the worry is we've become totally reliant on it. Do our forces have the skills to work with map, compass and pencil anymore?
Well, they're certainly given those skills. I mean, the forces training is always based on the idea that GPS or the other elements of modern communication technologies may go down. So there is always a backup method. The question is, how well do they use them? And, this particular incident in Grant Shapps' plane was not in any sense serious, because it affects civilian airliners as well that go over these areas where the Russians are playing games. And they just go on to inertial navigation, just fly a course. The issue is really that when an aircraft goes out of the jam zone, GPS reboots itself. And so pilots report, this is civilian pilots, they report that alarms start going off all over the cockpit as the system reboots itself. And that can be a bit unnerving. It's not caused anything other than inconvenience so far, but clearly the Russians are playing games and they are affecting civilian traffic as much as military traffic when they do this.
On the skills, you said that they are given those skills. It's a question of how well they're used. I mean, you have to use them regularly, don't you, to keep them current?
You do. And I think events like this, the Grant Shapps event, let's call it, I think should be a wake-up call to the forces to look again at how good their backup systems and resilience training is, because it's absolutely vital. I mean, they start from the principle that in warfare things will go wrong. And, we're moving from a system or an idea where we engage in operations. We spent 30 years doing operations, usually against opponents who are not nearly as technically clever as we are. And we're now moving towards having to get ourselves ready for war fighting against an opponent who is a peer of ours. And that means that we've got to re-examine all of the ways in which things will go wrong, probably in quite extensive ways, once operations start. We hope they don't, but they might. And that's what the military have got to re-examine. And little incidents like this that happened to Grant Shapps, I think, are a very good wake-up call to the military to think carefully about real operational resilience.
Now, military vehicles, even the smallest ones, tend to be noisy beasts, but not the Army's most recently upgraded Land Rovers. A handful have had their combustion engines replaced with electric motors and batteries sitting under the bonnet. That bonnet might now make the loudest noise you'll hear from the vehicle. This is part of the Army's Project Lurcher, which is developing electric vehicle technology. And now a partnership has been launched with McLaren to see how Formula One technology could also improve the Army's vehicles. It could all help with climate change goals, but the Army says it's really about making better performing vehicles for soldiers. Corporal Brian Muntz leads Project Lurcher at the Armoured Trial and Development Unit.
I've been a big advocate of electrically propelled vehicles ever since Herrick 13, when we were driving around at the still of night and you're realising that just even a quad bike was extremely loud, waking up all the dogs for miles around. And also from my years of working in anti-tanks and realising that quite often, especially from a flank position, you're going to hear the armour before you're going to see the armour. So if we can delay how quick we can get detected, that's going to increase our impact on the battlefield. The current battlefield is actually soaked with sensors and thermal optics to actually detect vehicles and individuals on the battlefield. So if we can start reducing that detection time, that's going to give us an operational advantage. Now, electric propulsion might offer that advantage. We need to actually trial these vehicles to actually understand where that advantage is and see where the constraints are. The main ways that we can actually collaborate with McLaren is learning from what they've applied to the motorsport industry. We need to make sure that we can start bringing in their concepts on how they win a race to how we can win a fight.
Well, let's bring in Lieutenant General Richard Nugee, whose career took him from junior officer in the Royal Artillery to non-executive director for climate change and sustainability at the Ministry of Defence. And also with us is Dr. Fabian Villalobos. He's an engineer specialising in the security sector at the RAND Corporation. Welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for your time. Richard, if I can start with you, this partnership with McLaren to see what Formula One technology could bring to military vehicles, is it genuinely exciting or does it feel like a gimmick?
No, I think it's genuinely exciting. I think there's opportunity here because Formula One are some of the absolute trailblazers for new technology when it comes to automotive and the automotive industry. And I think, therefore, that if we get into a partnership with them that drives innovation into trying to look for new automotive ideas, then that can only be a good thing.
Fabian, welcome to Sitrep. Can replacing a combustion engine in a Land Rover with an electric drive system deliver the same or even better vehicle performance, or are there compromises to be made?
There's going to be trade-offs. If you're talking a one-to-one comparison, it's going to be hard to make that comparison because you're going to have to replace the powertrain with the larger battery system, which has volume, size, weight, power constraints. But the trade-off is that you gain additional capabilities like additional silent watch, additional power to support additional systems that are power hungry, both now and into the future.
Richard, Land Rovers were used out on the ground in Iraq, controversially so, and eventually withdrawn from that role. So to get those battlefield advantages of lower noise and heat signature, is this kind of conversion going to have to, in reality, be possible with bigger and heavier vehicles as well?
Well, I think there's a two-stage approach. I think that if we relied exclusively on electricity, that is going to be quite difficult in any operational environment. And I was in those Land Rovers in 2003, so I know exactly what the situation was. But I think that having some form of hybrid mechanism gets all the advantages of, if you like, the silent watch, but also other advantages of better off-road capability because you've got a lower centre of gravity because of the battery. And interestingly, the crew are much more alert because they're not being sort of juggled about by either vibration or by noise all the time that they're not in silent watch. And so you get real advantage from an operational perspective. But one has to be really careful about range and about the ability to refuel. And the reason for that is because in an operational environment, you can get unexpected things that you have to do. No plan survives contact, so on. So I think it's a compromise. As Fabian said, we need to make sure that we get all the advantages of the silent watch and better crew management, but also have an ability to refuel quickly. And at the moment, I don't think pure electricity offers that.
And Fabian, on that note then that Richard spoke about, is seen as a barrier to getting more electric vehicles on our roads, even in a civilian capacity at home. Is there any way you could deliver electric vehicle charging at scale on a deployed military operation?
It'll require new equipment. It'll require rethinking logistical trains and other sustainment, maybe different force structure at the unit level, but it's probably technically doable. It's just that it'll take a while for folks to get there. As Lieutenant General mentioned, there's going to be trade-offs, but if you look at the near term, where there are goals to utilize the hybrid vehicles in the interim before stepping into full electric, battery electric vehicles, you gain some resilience in that you are able to leverage the existing fuel supply chains from JP8 and related fuels, while also leveraging the extended battery power. Of course, there's additional trade-offs in that you'll have a more complex system, which means maintenance and other Class 9 type parts will increase in complexity as well.
And Richard, is there a solution to the range question? Giant battery vehicles rather than tankers, perhaps, for extreme circumstances?
I think it's, I often asked, not about Land Rovers, but about tanks, 70-ton Western tanks. And if you look at that, which is an extremely heavy, 70 tons, lethal vehicle, you're talking about something that has over 300 miles of range, that can work in -20 and can be refueled in 7 minutes. Those are the sorts of parameters that we should be looking for our operational vehicles, and for smaller vehicles, longer range. And so to be able to have a recharging unit that can do that at that speed, because that's the speed you need on operations, I think is exceptionally difficult with current technology. I think that if technology moves on, and I think that the idea of going hybrid first and then into electric in the next generation after that offers us great opportunities, and I think is a really good way ahead. And I would slightly just put an alternative view to Fabian's about it being more complex. If we have electric drives on our vehicles, so the whole drive shaft and system is electric, all you're using the diesel engine for is to recharge the battery, then actually I think it could be relatively simple, because you're not dealing with two different types of drive shaft. And so I think there's real opportunity for hybrid electric on the battlefield, but it will be hybrid electric as opposed to fully electric until we can get the sort of charging that we need for an operational environment.
Okay, Fabian, when that charging is available, how big a military vehicle realistically could become fully electric?
If we make a comparison to the commercial market, the obvious counterpart is a Class 8 vehicle, which is the size of a semi-truck tractor trailer, similar to what the Tesla semi-truck is pursuing. So something probably in the lower, maybe 20-ton to 30-ton range is probably something that what you would be looking at.
And Richard, finally, the goal is improved sustainability in two ways: climate sustainability, but also sustainability of military capability. How far away do you think we are from electric vehicles being a real part of that?
So I think I'll go back to hybrid electric. They're already being tested, and that's they're proving greatly successful. And just to give one other example of why, they're an awful lot easier to drive. So our drivers need less training, and they get into less accidents with hybrid electric. So I think that's already on the cards. And I would like to see the military developing that much further. As opposed to full electric, I think we're, if you like, perhaps a generation away. And we must take our lead to a certain extent from the sort of technology that's going into the automotive industry. And that's why, Formula One's a really good idea, because that's where cutting edge technology will be proven before we can take it on and trust it enough to be able to put into an operational environment where lives are at risk, as opposed to just a nice thing to do. And that's the acid test. If we put lives at risk for something that actually won't deliver, that's not good. What we need is something that will deliver better and save lives, or at least protect lives.
Lieutenant General Richard Nugee, Dr. Fabian Villalobos, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike, a final thought then. Whether it's using electric vehicles or satellite navigation, militaries have faced a dilemma with new technology for centuries. Technology brings change. Change brings risk, but no risk, no reward.
Yeah, absolutely right, Kate. I mean, there are no technologies which don't ultimately find their way onto the battlefield if there's any utility in them, and in most cases there is some military utility. And so it's always a question of finding the right balance. We always say that technology is a very useful servant, but a dangerous master, and that expresses the problem. But I'm always impressed by what Guido Due said, the Italian air warfare specialist in the 1920s. I mean, he always said that success goes to those countries who can anticipate changes in the character of warfare, not those countries that adapt to them afterwards. Everybody adapts to them, but the successful ones anticipate them. And getting that anticipation right is very high risk, and it's much easier said than done. That's the problem.
Lessons for all of us there, Mike. Thank you so much. And thanks to all of our guests. Professor Michael Clarke and I will be back with another Sitrep next Thursday. Until then, you can stay up to date on our news website, forces.net, and watch the latest stories from the team by searching for Forces News on YouTube. For now, though, from me, Kate Gerbeau, thank you for listening. Bye-bye.